Amina woke up that morning just like any other day, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever. The sun had barely risen, and a soft golden light filled her small bedroom. She stretched lazily, listening to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood waking up, birds chirping, distant traffic, and the soft voices of neighbors opening their shops. For Amina, mornings were peaceful, almost like a small break from the busy world. And she loved them. She got out of bed, washed her face, and tied her hair into a simple ponytail. Amina was the kind of girl who didn't need fancy clothes or makeup to look beautiful. Her kindness alone made her glow. She slipped into her old but comfortable sneakers and stepped outside. The early breeze brushed against her cheeks, cool and refreshing. She smiled to herself. Morning walks were her favorite part of the day. Amina walked through the narrow streets of her neighborhood, greeting the people she knew. She always smiled at everyone, even strangers. Some knew her because she helped her mother at home, others because she volunteered at the community center. Even though she was quiet and shy, people respected her for her gentle heart. As she walked toward the lake, her usual spot, she noticed how calm everything felt. The sky above was a soft shade of pink, mixed with golden colors. It looked like a painting. She loved coming to the lake because it helped her clear her mind. Whenever she felt stressed or confused, she would sit on the stones near the water and just watch the waves move. It gave her a sense of peace that nothing else could. Amina walked slowly, enjoying every step. She noticed tiny details that most people ignored. The dew on the grass, a cat stretching on a fence, an old couple watering their plants. These little scenes made her feel connected to the world. She never imagined that within the next few minutes, this same peaceful world would turn into chaos. When she reached the lake, she took a deep breath. The water sparkled gently under the early sunlight. The air smelled fresh, like wet earth and clean wind. She began walking along the lake's edge, humming softly to herself. She didn't bring headphones or anything. She preferred the natural sounds of nature. For a while, everything remained peaceful. She watched ducks swimming slowly, dipping their heads under the water. She watched the trees sway lightly. Everything was perfect. But then, something strange caught her attention. At first, she thought she was imagining it. A faint splash. Then another. She paused, listening carefully. The lake was usually calm in the morning. No one came this early. She frowned and took a few steps closer to the shore, trying to see where the sound was coming from. Suddenly, she heard a louder splash, a sharp, desperate sound that didn't match the peaceful morning at all. Her heart jumped. She looked around again, her eyes scanning the water. For a moment she saw nothing, and she wondered if a fish had jumped. But the next second she saw it. Something, or someone, moved in the water, but not in a normal way. It wasn't swimming. It was struggling. Amina froze for a moment. Her mind raced. Was someone drowning? Was she supposed to call someone? Was she supposed to run? Before she could think properly, she heard it again. A faint cry, barely loud enough to understand, but filled with fear. Help. Amina's heartbeat quickened. She stepped closer to the water, squinting her eyes. And then she saw it clearly. A man's head barely above the surface, his arms flailing weakly as he tried to stay afloat. He looked exhausted, terrified, and he was sinking fast. The peaceful morning disappeared instantly. This was real. This was urgent. Amina felt her stomach twist in fear. She wasn't a strong swimmer. She didn't know how deep the lake was in that area. She didn't know who the man was or how long he had been there. But she knew one thing for sure. If she didn't act now, he would die. She looked around desperately, hoping someone else was nearby. But the lake was empty. No joggers, no fishermen, no families, just her. And the drowning man who was seconds away from disappearing under the water. Amina's heart thumped loudly in her chest. She took a deep breath. She knew she had a choice. Run for help and risk being too late, or jump in and try to save the man with her own hands. Amina had always been kind. Always gentle. Always willing to help. But this moment was different. This was dangerous. This was life or death. She could feel fear crawling through her body, but something stronger rose above it. A sense of responsibility, a flame of courage she didn't even know she had. She knew she couldn't stand there doing nothing. And in that instant, without thinking of the risks, without thinking of herself, without imagining what would happen next, Amina kicked off her shoes and ran straight toward the water, ready to give everything she had to save a stranger's life. Amina's feet splashed into the cold water, and for a moment the shock of the temperature made her gasp. The lake was much colder than she expected. It felt like icy fingers grabbing her legs as she pushed through the shallow part. But she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Every second mattered. The man's weak cries were fading, and that scared her more than the freezing water. Her heart thudded loudly, but she forced her breathing to stay steady. The farther she went, the deeper the water became, and soon it reached her waist. She hesitated for half a second, staring at the man who was struggling far ahead. His arms splashed wildly before disappearing under the surface again. Amina felt a wave of fear rise in her chest. She wasn't a trained swimmer. She had only learned the basics when she was younger, playing in a shallow community pool. She didn't know how strong the currents were. She didn't know if she could make it back with him. But she also knew she would never forgive herself if she didn't try. She sucked in a deep breath and pushed forward, kicking hard as the water reached her neck. The lake suddenly felt enormous and unfriendly, stretching around her like a dark, endless wall. The peaceful morning had turned into a battlefield, her against the deep, cold water. The man went under again. "No, no, no," she whispered under her breath. Amina took one more breath and dove into the lake, swimming as fast as she could. Her arms cut through the water in fast, determined strokes. She ignored how heavy her clothes felt. She ignored the sting of cold that made her muscles ache. She ignored her lungs screaming for air. All she saw was the spot where the man had disappeared. When she reached it, she paused, treading water and scanning the surface. Panic darted through her. He was gone. Then, beneath her, she saw a faint movement. Without thinking, she dove underwater again. Her eyes burned as she searched the dark blur below. The water was murky, swirling with sand and bubbles. Her chest tightened. She didn't know how long she could hold her breath, but she kept pushing deeper. And then, finally, she saw him. His body was sinking slowly like he was giving up. His arms floated weakly, his eyes half closed. Amina felt a jolt of desperation. She reached out, grabbing his arm with all the strength she had left. He was heavy, much heavier than she expected. Panic stabbed her again. How was she supposed to pull him up alone? But she refused to let go. Kicking hard, she dragged him upward. Her muscles screamed in pain, but she didn't stop. It felt like swimming with a stone tied to her, but she pushed and pushed until they finally broke through the surface, gasping for air. The man coughed weakly, barely conscious. "Help," he whispered. "I've got you," Amina said, breathless. "Just hold on." He couldn't hold on. He was too weak. So Amina wrapped her arm around his chest and began dragging him toward shore. Every movement felt harder than the last. The cold water made her limbs numb, and exhaustion spread through her like fire. But she kept going. For every meter she swam, it felt like the lake was pulling them 2 meters back. She couldn't tell how long it took. Her mind blurred. Her legs cramped. Her breathing turned shallow. She felt her strength slipping away. At one point she wondered if they would both sink. But then, after what felt like forever, her foot touched the muddy ground beneath the water. Relief shot through her. She pushed forward, step by shaky step, dragging the man with her until they reached the shallow area. Amina's legs wobbled as she pulled him out of the water and onto the muddy grass. Her entire body trembled with exhaustion. She collapsed beside him, her chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. For a few seconds she couldn't hear anything, not the birds, not the wind, not even her own heartbeat. Everything went silent. When her hearing slowly returned, she heard the man coughing weakly. He was alive, but barely. Amina forced herself to sit up and leaned over him. His face was pale, his lips turning blue. His clothes were soaked and heavy with water. She put her ear near his mouth, checking his breath the way she had seen in a first aid video online. His breathing was shallow but steady. You're okay," she whispered, still trembling. She reached out, gently tapping his cheek. "Can you hear me? Please wake up." The man opened his eyes for a moment, unfocused and cloudy, and Amina felt a spark of hope. But he quickly slipped back into unconsciousness. Amina looked around desperately. There was no one nearby. No one had seen the rescue. No one had called for help. She felt the weight of fear push down on her. She was alone with an unconscious stranger who had nearly drowned. But she didn't panic. She stayed beside him, breathing slowly to calm herself. Her clothes were dripping. Her hair stuck to her forehead. Her arms felt like they were filled with stones. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she kept her eyes on the man, ready to help him again if he struggled. The peaceful morning had turned into the most intense moment of her life. Amina had no idea who the man was or what had caused him to drown. She didn't know what would happen next. All she knew was that she had saved him. And she had no idea how extraordinary the next moments of her life were about to become. Amina's arms felt like they were made of rubber as she sat beside the unconscious man, trying to catch her breath. Every part of her body was trembling from cold and exhaustion. Her wet clothes clung to her skin, heavy and uncomfortable, but she didn't care about any of that. Her attention stayed fixed on the man lying on the ground, barely moving, his chest rising and falling in weak, uneven breaths. For a moment, she wondered if she should try to run and find help. But the thought scared her. What if he stopped breathing while she was gone? What if those few minutes were the difference between life and death? She couldn't risk it. Not after everything she had just done. She gently lifted his wrist, checking for a pulse. Something she had seen people do in movies, something she hoped she was doing right. His pulse was faint, but it was there. That gave her a small sense of relief, enough to steady her racing heart. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, as if her voice alone could keep him alive. She leaned closer and noticed small details she hadn't seen before. His suit, now soaked and wrinkled, looked expensive. His watch, though dripping with water, seemed valuable. His hair, though messy and wet, looked like it had been styled earlier that morning. Who was he? What had he been doing alone in the lake so early? But she pushed those thoughts aside. His identity didn't matter right now. His life did. Amina looked around again, hoping for someone, anyone, to appear. But the lakeside was still empty and silent, as though the world was unaware of the life and death struggle that had just taken place. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her small shoulders. Her fingers shook as she wiped water away from his forehead. The cold breeze made her shiver harder. She rubbed her own arms, trying to warm herself up, but it didn't help much. The morning sun was climbing, but the warmth hadn't reached her yet. A sudden cough from the man made her jump. She leaned forward immediately. "Hey, are you awake? Can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open for a brief second. They were a deep, tired shade of blue. He stared at her, confused, almost afraid. His lips parted, but only a faint, broken sound escaped. Amina leaned even closer. "It's okay. You're safe now. I pulled you out of the water." The man blinked slowly, like he was trying to understand her words. But before he could respond, his eyelids dropped again and he lost consciousness. Amina's heart sank. She gently shook his shoulder. "Don't go back to sleep. Stay awake, please." But he didn't move. She sat back, her breath quickening again as fear crept in. What if he slipped into something worse? What if he needed medical help immediately? She didn't have a phone. She had left it at home because she liked to disconnect during her morning walks. She regretted that now more than anything. Should she run home? Should she scream for help? Should she try something else? Her thoughts tangled in panic, but she forced herself to calm down. "Think, Amina, think." She remembered something from a first aid lesson they had briefly covered at school. If someone is unconscious but breathing, they should be kept warm to prevent shock. Her eyes quickly scanned the area. There was nothing she could use, not a towel, not a blanket. Only her own thin jacket. Without hesitation, she took it off and draped it over the man's cold chest. The morning breeze hit her bare, wet arms like needles, but she ignored the pain. "You need it more than I do," she murmured softly. Minutes ticked by slowly. Amina stayed by his side, watching every rise and fall of his chest. Every small movement gave her hope. But every minute also made her more aware of the silence around them. Something felt strange. Too quiet. She looked around again, and this time she noticed something she hadn't before. Deep tire marks in the dirt near the water's edge. Fresh ones. As if a vehicle had been parked very close to the lake earlier. But why would someone drive so close to the water? Her eyes narrowed as she studied the tracks. They weren't from an ordinary car. They were wide, deep, heavy. Like something large. Something expensive. An uncomfortable feeling stirred inside her. Something about the man, the suit, the watch, the mysterious vehicle tracks. It all felt unusual. This wasn't a normal accident. Just when she began piecing her thoughts together, she heard a faint sound in the distance. At first she thought it was the wind. But no, it was something else. A low hum. A distant engine. Getting closer. Amina's body tensed. She turned her head toward the road beyond the trees. The sound grew louder, deeper, heavier, like the purr of a luxury engine. She stood slowly, wiping her shaking hands on her wet clothes. Her heart hammered in her chest. Something, or someone, was coming. She didn't know who. She didn't know why. But deep inside, she sensed it had something to do with the man lying unconscious beside her. And even before she saw anything, she knew this moment was about to change everything. The distant engine grew louder, rumbling through the quiet morning air. Amina's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. She stepped closer to the unconscious man, unsure of what she was supposed to do but knowing she needed to protect him somehow. She didn't even know his name, Yet she felt responsible for him, almost as if fate had placed her here at the exact moment he needed someone. The humming sound turned into a deep roar as a large, dark vehicle emerged from the trees. At first, all Amina could see was the shadow of something big and glossy moving toward the lake. Then the sunlight hit it and the sleek shape became clear. A Rolls-Royce. Not just any car, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, its silver grille glinting like the face of a quiet beast. The sight of it made her breath hitch. She had only seen cars like that in movies or on TV, never in real life and definitely not in her quiet neighborhood. What was a car like that doing here? Who did it belong to? The car rolled to a gentle stop only a few meters away from her and the unconscious man. Dust rose around its tires before settling. Amina took a small step back, clutching her hands together. She felt tiny in front of such an expensive, intimidating vehicle. The back door opened with a soft, heavy click. Then another. Within seconds, two large figures stepped out, men dressed in sharp black suits, sunglasses covering their eyes even though the sun was still low. They moved quickly, not like ordinary people but like professionals. Their posture, their speed, their expressionless faces, everything about them screamed bodyguards. Amina felt a nervous chill run down her spine. The two men scanned the area, their eyes moving from the lake to the trees to the ground. Then they saw her, and the man lying beside her. In an instant, their serious expressions cracked with shock. "Sir," one of them shouted, his voice firm and urgent. Both bodyguards rushed toward the unconscious man. Amina instinctively stepped back again, unsure whether she should explain or stay quiet. Their sudden presence felt overwhelming. She had never been this close to people who looked like security officers before, especially ones who moved with such controlled strength. One of them knelt beside the man, touching his neck, checking his pulse just like she had. Relief washed over his face when he felt it. "He's alive," he said. The other bodyguard looked at Amina, his eyebrows furrowing as if he was trying to understand who she was and why she was there. She felt her cheeks heat up under his intense gaze. "What happened?" he demanded, though his voice wasn't angry, just urgent. Amina swallowed hard. He was drowning. I saw him in the water and I pulled him out." Both men stared at her, stunned, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the quiet coughing of the man on the ground. Amina suddenly felt very small. Her hair was dripping. Her clothes were soaked and muddy. Her arms were scratched from pulling him. She looked nothing like a hero, yet here she stood, while two powerful-looking men stared at her as if she had done something impossible. The bodyguard closest to her softened his expression. "You saved him." Amina nodded lightly. "I tried my best." The man blinked slowly, clearly shocked. He exchanged a quick glance with the other bodyguard, and both men seemed equally stunned. "He disappeared from our sight for only 10 minutes, the other bodyguard said. "And you found him before us." Amina didn't understand what he meant. She wanted to ask, but before she could say anything, the unconscious man groaned. His fingers twitched. His chest rose in a deeper breath. "He's waking up," a bodyguard said quickly. They moved aside a little, giving him space but not too far. Amina took a step back, watching anxiously. The man's eyes opened slowly, heavily, as if he was waking from a long, painful dream. He blinked a few times, confused and dazed. Then he looked around at the two bodyguards, and finally his gaze landed on Amina. Their eyes met. For a brief second, everything seemed to pause. The wind, the sound of distant traffic, even her racing heartbeat. There was shock in his eyes, then something softer, almost grateful. The bodyguard leaned in. "Sir, are you okay?" The man took a shaky breath. His voice was weak, raspy. She saved me." The way he said it, slow, sincere, almost emotional, made Amina feel a flutter in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She had never been praised like that before, especially not by a man who looked like he belonged to a different world entirely. Before she could speak, the second bodyguard's earpiece crackled. "We found him. He's alive," he spoke into it. "Send the medical team." "Medical team?" Amina blinked. What kind of person had bodyguards and a medical team on standby? The more she looked at the man, the more questions filled her mind. Who was he? Why were so many people looking for him? And how did a simple morning walk turn into this whirlwind of confusion and danger? The man tried to sit up, but the bodyguard stopped him gently. "Sir, you need to rest." His eyes found Amina again. "Thank you, you risked your life." Amina shook her head quickly. "I just did what anyone would do." But one of the bodyguards replied firmly, "No. Many people would have watched. Few would have jumped in." A strange, warm feeling filled her chest. She didn't feel like a hero, but hearing that made her heart flutter. Before she could respond, the sound of more engines filled the air. A group of black SUVs rolled into view, fast, powerful, and official-looking. Amina stared at them, her mouth slightly open. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something far bigger than she could ever imagine. Amina stood frozen as the black SUVs rolled to a stop, their tires crunching over the gravel. One after another, the doors flew open and several more men stepped out, each dressed in sharp suits, each moving with alarming precision. They didn't walk, they swept across the area, scanning everything with sharp, trained eyes. Their presence alone made the quiet lakeside feel like a high-security zone. Amina took a small step backward, overwhelmed by the sudden swarm of strangers. She wasn't used to seeing even one security guard, let alone a whole team. And they weren't just any guards, they were the kind she had seen only in documentaries about billionaires or politicians. One man, taller and more commanding than the rest, approached the bodyguards already kneeling beside the rescued man. His steps were quick, confident, purposeful. His voice cut through the air like a blade. Status. He's alive, one of the earlier bodyguards responded. But weak. She pulled him from the water. The tall man turned sharply to look at Amina. The intensity of his stare made her breath hitch. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in confusion, as if trying to understand how someone like her, small, drenched, and trembling, had accomplished something so critical. You did that? He asked. Amina nodded nervously. He was drowning. The man didn't react the way she expected. He didn't smile. He didn't thank her. Instead he looked stunned. Deeply, quietly stunned. Then he said something she didn't understand. We lost visual on him for 3 minutes. 3. He looked around at his team, frustrated. And she found him. Amina swallowed hard. Why did every single one of them sound shocked that a normal girl had saved the man? What did they expect? That he'd save himself? Before she could ask anything, a loud clicking sound broke the tension, boxes and equipment being opened. A small medical team rushed forward with emergency kits. One of them gently guided Amina aside. Please move back, miss. She nodded slowly, stepping back to give them space. But even as she moved, her eyes kept drifting toward the man she had saved. He looked pale, fragile, and exhausted. Seeing him surrounded by a full medical team made her realize just how close he had been to dying. Without her, he would have never made it out of that lake. The thought made her stomach twist. As the medical team checked his breathing, measured his pulse, and gently raised his back, the man opened his eyes again, just barely. His voice came out rough and strained. Where am I? You're safe now, sir, one of the medics replied. You were found in the lake. The man blinked slowly, confused. His gaze wandered until it found Amina again. This time, his eyes softened, almost like he recognized something in her. His lips parted and he whispered, You? Amina took one hesitant step forward. You're okay now. You're safe. He stared at her as if trying to memorize her face before closing his eyes again. One of the medical workers gently touched Amina's arm. Miss, did you see what caused him to fall in? She shook her head. No. When I saw him, he was already struggling. The man from earlier, the tall, commanding one, studied her carefully. His tone was serious but not unkind. Did you see anyone else around? Any cars? Any unusual movement? Amina hesitated. She remembered the tire tracks near the water. Fresh. But she wasn't sure if they were connected. I saw tire marks, she said softly. Like a big car was here before. The tall man's expression changed instantly, sharpening like a blade touching metal. He turned to one of his men. Get a visual sweep of the area. Now, check the perimeter for tracks, any footprints, anything. Several guards rushed off immediately. Amina's eyes widened. What's happening? Was he attacked? The man didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her with a mixture of respect and worry. You saved someone very important, he said quietly. More important than you realize. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked at the unconscious man again, now with confusion blooming in her chest. Who exactly had she pulled from the lake? The medical team positioned an oxygen mask over his face. One of the bodyguards leaned in, whispering something urgently. The tall man exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if struggling to stay calm. He shouldn't have wandered off alone, he muttered. It's too dangerous right now. Dangerous? The word clung to Amina's mind like a shadow. She felt a shiver crawl up her spine, not from the cold this time but from fear. The more she listened, the more she realized she wasn't just in the middle of a dramatic rescue. She was in the middle of something big. Bigger than anything she had ever imagined. One of the medics looked up suddenly. His breathing is stabilizing. We need to move him to a controlled environment. The tall man nodded. Prepare the vehicle. 2 bodyguards stepped toward Amina. She stiffened, unsure what they wanted. One of them spoke gently. Miss, we need you to come with us. Her breath caught. What? Did I do something wrong? The tall man stepped in. No, you did something right. But we need to ask you questions. Important questions. And he glanced at the rescued man, wants to see you when he wakes. Amina's pulse quickened. She looked at the expensive cars, the guards, the equipment. Then at the man whose life she had saved. Nothing about this morning made sense anymore. But she took a breath and gave a small nod. Because somehow, she knew her life was about to change forever. Amina followed the bodyguard slowly, her wet shoes squishing with every step. She felt like she was stepping into a world she didn't belong to, a world of luxury cars, strict orders, and people who moved like shadows. Everything felt unreal. Only 30 minutes ago, she had been walking peacefully by the lake. Now she was surrounded by men in black suits and a billionaire-looking stranger who had nearly died. As they guided her toward one of the black SUVs, Amina hesitated. She looked back at the man she'd rescued. He was lying on a stretcher now, oxygen mask secured to his face, medical workers adjusting tubes and equipment around him. Even unconscious, he looked important. Someone whose life affected many others. She whispered to the nearest bodyguard, "Is he going to be okay?" "He will be, thanks to you," the guard replied without hesitation. Amina felt her cheeks grow warm. She wasn't used to praise. She wasn't used to anyone noticing her at all, beyond her neighborhood. And now, suddenly, men in expensive suits were thanking her like she had done something extraordinary. They opened the door of the SUV for her. She stepped inside slowly, feeling the soft leather seat beneath her. The interior smelled clean like expensive cologne and polished wood. It felt strange to sit somewhere so luxurious while wearing drenched clothes and shaking from cold. The tall man, the one who seemed to be in charge, sat across from her. His eyes studied her carefully, observing every detail. Her wet hair, her muddy shoes, her trembling hands. Amina felt exposed under his sharp gaze. Finally he spoke. "Do you know who you saved?" Amina shook her head. "No, I don't." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "His name is Daniel Fraser." The name meant nothing to her. The man seemed surprised. "You really don't know him?" Amina shook her head again. "He's one of the youngest billionaires in the country," the man continued. "The CEO of Fraser Innovations. He has enemies, competitors, people who watch his every move. He's important." Amina blinked. Billionaire? The man she dragged out of the water? The man who almost died today? Her mind couldn't process it. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had pulled him up from the depths of the lake. She saved someone like that? Someone with power, money, fame? The thought startled her. The tall man continued, "He shouldn't have been alone. We were all nearby, but he walked away to take a private call. 3 minutes later, we lost sight of him." Amina frowned. Did he fall in? Was it an accident? The man hesitated. Deep in his expression, Amina saw something unsettling. A shadow of fear. "We're not sure yet," he said quietly. "That's why what you saw is important." A chill ran through her, not from cold but from realization. Something wasn't right. Something dangerous. Before she could ask more, the SUV door opened again. 2 medics loaded Daniel into the vehicle behind hers. His head was still resting against the stretcher, his breathing weak but steady. Amina's heart squeezed at the sight of him. He looked so fragile, so human, nothing like a billionaire from magazines. He looked like a man fighting to hold on to life. One of the guards leaned in. "We're taking him to a secure location. You'll come with us." Amina's eyes widened. "W with you? Why?" "He wants to see you," the tall man said simply. "And we need your statement for our investigation. You're the only witness." Amina hesitated. Everything inside her felt twisted with nerves. She was just an ordinary girl. She had school, responsibilities. She wasn't supposed to be in cars like this. She wasn't supposed to be part of something this huge. But something inside her whispered softly, "Maybe this is bigger than fear. Maybe this is fate." She nodded quietly. The door closed, the engine hummed, and the convoy of luxury SUVs began to move. As the trees flashed past the windows, Amina hugged her arms around herself, trying to absorb the strange reality she had stepped into. Behind her, in the other vehicle, Daniel Fraser stirred, his fingers twitching. Amina glanced back through the tiny rear window. Even from a distance, she could see his silhouette. Something about it tugged at her chest. Maybe because she had seen him at his most vulnerable. Maybe because she had saved his life. Maybe because she felt strangely connected to someone she didn't even know. The convoy reached the main road, speeding gently but firmly. Amina watched the streets pass by, feeling like she was being pulled away from everything familiar. The tall man spoke again, his voice lower this time. "You're not in trouble. But you must understand, things around Daniel Fraser are rarely simple." Amina turned to him slowly. "What do you mean?" He looked out the window, his jaw tight. "He has enemies. People who would do anything to hurt him. And if someone was behind what happened at that lake." He paused. Amina's breath caught. It felt like the temperature inside the car dropped. "Then you, miss," he finished quietly, "may have just walked into something very dangerous." Amina stared at him, her heart pounding, her fingers curling around the seat. "Dangerous?" she whispered. "For me?" The tall man met her eyes, serious, calm, and deadly honest. "Saving a powerful man," he said, "sometimes makes you part of his world, whether you want it or not." Amina swallowed hard. She had no idea how true those words were about to become. The drive lasted longer than Amina expected. The sun had already dipped behind the buildings, leaving the world feeling colder, darker, and strangely quieter. The city lights blurred into long yellow lines outside the tinted SUV windows as the convoy moved through the streets like a silent parade of shadows. Amina pressed her palm lightly against the cool glass, trying to calm her racing mind. She kept replaying the moment she pulled Daniel out of the water. The shock on his face, the weight of his body, the fear in his fading eyes. She wondered if he would remember any of it. She wondered if he would even wake up tonight. After nearly 40 minutes, the vehicle slowed down. Amina looked up and found herself staring at a massive metal gate rising ahead of them. Two guards checked the convoy quickly, then the gate slid open silently. Inside was a large private estate surrounded by tall trees, stone walls, and a long driveway lined with quiet lights. The SUV drove deeper into the property until it stopped in front of a huge house. No mansion. It looked like something from a movie, with wide steps, tall pillars, and warm golden lights glowing through high windows. The tall man opened Amina's door. "Come with me. You're safe here." Safe. The word felt heavy. She wasn't sure if she believed it, but she stepped out anyway. As they walked inside, Amina felt small. The floor beneath her was polished marble. The air smelled like fresh flowers mixed with soft perfume. Paintings hung on the walls, paintings that looked expensive enough to pay for her entire neighborhood. A woman in a fitted black uniform approached them. Her hair was tight in a bun, her movements silent and sharp. "She's the one who saved him?" the woman asked, eyeing Amina with surprise. "Yes," the tall man replied. "Make sure she gets warm clothes and something to eat." The woman nodded and motioned for Amina to follow. Amina hesitated and looked back at the tall man. "What about him? Is he here?" "They rushed him to the private medical wing," he answered. "The doctors will call me if he wakes." His expression softened, just slightly. "You did well today. Better than most adults trained for emergencies." Amina didn't know what to say. Compliments like that felt too big for her. She followed the woman down a hallway. The mansion felt endless, with rooms that seemed to stretch forever. Finally they reached a guest room. Inside was a soft bed, warm lights, and a stack of clean clothes folded neatly on a chair. "Change?" the woman said. "I'll bring food." When she left, Amina stood still for a moment, staring around in disbelief. Was she really here? In a billionaire's mansion? Wearing wet shoes and smelling like lake water? She changed into the clothes, soft, comfortable, far nicer than anything she owned. When she caught her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. A soft knock came at the door. A tray of warm food was placed on a small table. Soup, bread, fruit, tea, all looking too perfect to be real. Amina sat down and began eating slowly, her hands finally stopping their trembling. As she swallowed each bite, exhaustion washed over her like a slow wave. She didn't realize how tired she was until now. But just when she felt her body relax, the door opened again. This time it wasn't the woman returning. It was the tall man. "Daniel is awake," he said quietly. Amina froze. "What?" she whispered. "He woke up a few minutes ago. He's asking for you." Amina's heart thudded so hard she thought it might burst. Why would a billionaire ask for her? Why would someone so important want to see an ordinary girl like her? She stood slowly. Her legs felt heavy and shaky. Can I see him? She asked. Yes. But there's something you need to know. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. When he woke up, his first words were your name. Amina's breath caught. She didn't know how he even knew her name. He remembers you, the man continued, and he wants to talk to you privately. He gestured toward the hallway. Come. He's waiting. Amina followed him, her heart pounding with every step. The hall seemed darker now, quieter. Shadows stretched along the floor, and her breath sounded too loud in her own ears. They finally reached a set of double doors. A guard pushed them open. Inside was a small, softly lit medical room. And there, lying in a hospital bed with wires attached to his chest, was Daniel Fraser. His eyes were open, and they turned immediately toward her. Amina stopped breathing. His voice was weak but clear. You saved me. Amina swallowed a lump in her throat, suddenly overwhelmed. Daniel lifted his hand slightly like he was trying to reach out. I need to talk to you, he whispered. About what really happened. Amina stepped closer slowly, unaware that behind the soft glow of the machines, someone else was listening and watching her very carefully. Amina stood at the edge of the hospital bed, her hands clasped tightly together. Daniel Fraser's eyes, still a little pale, still tired, stared at her with a mix of gratitude, awe, and something she couldn't quite place. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Outside, the mansion was quiet. The hum of the air conditioning, the faint beeping of the monitors, and her own heartbeat were the only sounds she could hear. You saved my life, Daniel said again, his voice barely above a whisper. Each word felt deliberate, heavy with meaning. I don't know how to thank you. Amina shook her head. I just did what anyone would do, she said softly. Her voice sounded smaller than she expected, almost lost in the vast, high-ceilinged room. Daniel's lips curved slightly. No. Most people would have just watched. Most people wouldn't have jumped in, not in that cold water, not alone, not knowing anything. He paused, his gaze unwavering. You risked everything for me. A warmth spread across Amina's chest, a strange mix of pride, relief, and disbelief. She had never thought of herself as brave or important or capable of changing anyone's life, but right now she could feel it. She had done something extraordinary. Daniel's gaze softened further. I want you to know, your courage means more than money, more than influence, more than anything I have. You remind me that real heroes don't wear suits or live in mansions. They're ordinary people willing to act when it matters most. Amina felt tears prick her eyes. She looked down embarrassed, but Daniel shook his head slightly. Look at me, he said gently. She lifted her eyes and he smiled faintly. You saved me. You risked your life for a stranger. That is something I'll never forget. Ever. She blinked, trying to find words, but none came. It felt like all the nervousness, all the exhaustion, all the fear she had felt since that morning had finally melted away. For the first time, she realized she had made a difference in someone's life. Not just someone's, but someone who could change the world, someone who mattered in ways she had never imagined. Daniel shifted slightly, still weak, but more stable. I know this is sudden and probably overwhelming, but I want you to know that I'll do whatever I can to make sure you're safe, cared for, and appreciated. Not because of who I am, but because of who you are. Amina's lips trembled. She had never imagined words like that coming from someone like him. She wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a quiet, thank you. Daniel's eyes softened. You don't need to thank me. You saved me. That's already more than enough. At that moment, the bodyguards standing silently near the door relaxed slightly, though they still kept a watchful eye on the room. The air in the mansion no longer felt intimidating. It felt protective. Safe. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Amina realized she was no longer just a small, ordinary girl who had taken a walk by the lake. She was someone who had faced fear and acted when it mattered most. Someone who had made a difference. Someone who had been seen and recognized for her courage. Daniel continued, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. I want you to know that from this moment, your life can be different if you want it to be. I can help open doors you never imagined, give opportunities you never thought were possible, but I also know this. Nothing can or should change the bravery you already have. Nothing can replace your heart. Amina's chest tightened. She didn't want the fame or the attention or the money. She only wanted to know that she had truly mattered, that she had made a real difference in someone's life. And for the first time that day she felt it. The mansion outside was quiet. The sun had set completely, leaving only the soft glow of lamps and monitors. And inside the room, two lives, one ordinary, one extraordinary, had intersected in a way that would change both forever. Daniel reached out just slightly, offering a hand. "I'll never forget you," he said softly. "You've given me a second chance at life. I owe you everything." Amina hesitated for a moment, then gently placed her hand over his. The warmth of his grip felt real, grounding her in the moment. She realized that sometimes, courage didn't come from strength or skill. It came from the choice to act, the decision to care, and the willingness to step forward when no one else would. In that quiet hospital room, Amina smiled faintly. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly proud of herself. That morning she had been an ordinary girl. By nightfall she had become a hero. Not in headlines or stories, but in the most important way possible. Someone had lived because of her, and that life would never forget her. And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that no matter what happened next, no matter the challenges, the attention, or the opportunities, she would always remember the moment she had faced fear, jumped into the unknown, and saved a life. The world outside could wait. Right now, she had done the most important thing anyone could ever do. She had given someone a chance to live. And that, she realized, was enough.